Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to Political Forum this Wednesday night. I'm your host, Dartesia Pitts, and I'm a board member of CAN TV. As you may know, Political Forum is a live, interactive program brought to you as a community service by CAN TV. And tonight, we are interviewing and talking to 15th Ward Alderman Raymond Lopez. Good evening, Alderman.
Good evening, Dartesia. How are you tonight?
I'm good. If you want to join in on the discussion, you can give us a call. The number to call in is at the bottom of your screen, 312-738-1060. Please tune in and join in on the discussion. So, Alderman, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Always a pleasure to be here.
It's always so much to talk about in the lovely city of Wind. So you are the alderman for the 15th Ward. Okay. Can you tell the viewers where the 15th Ward is?
Happily. The 15th Ward is on Chicago's southwest side. I represent the historic neighborhoods of Brighton Park, Gage Park, West Englewood, and Back of the Yards. Roughly from 41st and Kedzie to about 67th and Ashland.
Okay. So you have a fairly large ward for the most part.
A lot of walking. Keeps me skinny.
Oh, good. Walking is good exercise.
Absolutely.
And you have 2 ward offices?
Yes, I have 2 ward offices to help accommodate my seniors and my neighborhoods. One in West Englewood, 1650 West 63rd Street, and the other in my Brighton Park community at 2736 West 47th Street.
Okay. And this is a technology-driven society and all about social media. Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's www.the15thward.org. As well, people can follow me on Facebook with my official Facebook page, as well as on Twitter at rlopez 15th Ward.
Okay.
So we try to be as socially engaged
as
possible.
Got it. We have a caller already. We just begun and we have a caller. Might as well take it.
All right.
Hi, Alderman. I was calling to ask about what you think about these 606 type trails. I know that there's one obviously near the Logan Square area, and then now they're talking about doing one in Pilsen, and it seems like your community could be one where there could be one. Do you think that they're a positive way of bringing the community together, or could it be that they could be a hotbed for negative loitering?
Well, first off, thank you for that call. It's interesting that you mentioned like the 606 and the Paseo, which I think is the one in Pilsen that you're referencing, because in my ward, I have 2 abandoned rails that intersect 3 different neighborhoods. And I have actually proposed what I'm calling the 21st Century Trail, which would be a looped trail, the first of its kind in the city, to be built on the south side, connecting the 48th and 58th Street rails. They can be very positive, and I believe they can be a force for positive in all communities, not just for beautification and for park engagement, but if we tie them to economic development, which is what my plan does as far as redeveloping and energizing corridors like Racine Avenue, they can have a definite impact, positive impact on the communities.
I am totally Johnny-come-lately to the 606 trails. I actually just found out about them last week, and I think it is an excellent idea for revitalizing the community. So that will be an excellent use of space.
Absolutely, because for so many, that's just empty space, that
Right.
overgrown weeds.
Right. So we have another caller.
Yes, good evening. I'd like to ask Alderman Lopez why he feels, in New York, they have half the number of aldermen that we do in the city, and they've got 3 times the population, and somehow they've managed to get their murder rate way down, and their violence rate is negligible compared to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I just see year after year all kinds of money, all kinds of programs, this, that, and the other thing, and it does seem like our city is not run as efficiently as some other large cities. And so I wonder if you would address that again, because a lot of people bring that concern up, that we should have less aldermen. And you go and you look where another large city got a positive result. So maybe you could address that if you have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Sure. So you got a couple of questions in there, so I'll start with the 50 aldermen. Oftentimes we hear about the desire by some who are upset with either their local aldermen or local government in general that we should cut the size of the city council. I disagree because I think, not just because I am an alderman, but I would even say that I disagree because having a large number of aldermen automatically will provide us with a greater depth of diversity and representation in our city council as reflective of our city's 77 neighborhoods. Now, with regards to the violence, obviously that is something that I'm very intimately familiar with. Many of you have seen me routinely in the news and on newspapers speaking out against the violence in our communities. And a lot of the issues that we have seen as it relates to us versus a city, as you mentioned, New York, is that New York has a very targeted approach to dealing with crime in its city. They were able to transform from the community policing to strategic policing, focusing on those individuals who are causing the most amount of crime and violence in their areas. We are just now beginning to embark on a lot of those kind of similar measures in this city, but we're trying to do it in a way that is respectful of people's rights. Obviously, we've seen and discussed at length a lot of the reforms that are needed in this city by the police department. It's a topic of discussion even now. How do we monitor that? Should we have done it with a consent decree, or can we do it on our own without an external monitor? But we are making steps in the right direction in terms of how we strategically and surgically go after the individuals who are at the root of a lot of the violence in our city. Let's be clear, we are a city of 3 million with only about 1,500 individuals driving the violence. And if we can follow New York's model and strategically go after those individuals without infringing on the liberties of others, we'll be able to have the same results that you're talking about.
So that's a great question and also an excellent segue to some of our conversations prior to coming on the air today. And I want to focus on what the caller mentioned was kind of the issue of disinvestment. But before I ask that question, if you are just now tuning in, we are sitting down and talking to Alderman Raymond Lopez of the 15th Ward. Join in on our discussion. Give us a call. The number is listed at the bottom of your screen, 312-738-1060. But the caller mentioned or, identified what we discussed earlier, and it was the issue of disinvestment in our communities and the relationship that it has to crime. And there is a lot of different discussion out there on how we can fix gun violence and how we can work with the criminal justice reform. But do you believe, or can you discuss or touch on how disinvestment in the community is also affecting the high rate of crime?
Absolutely. I think it goes without saying for many of us that we believe that violence is not just a matter of policing. It's a matter of a lack of opportunity, which is fostered by the disinvestment in many of the communities in Chicago, particularly on the south and west sides. We cannot kid ourselves and say all neighborhoods have been invested in equally when you have certain parts of our communities, or even certain parts of my ward, that look like they were war-torn from the lack of disinvestment, a complete abandonment, and lack of delivery of city service. When you have communities where you have upwards of 70% unemployment for people who are 18 to 24 years old, those individuals have families, those individuals have children, those individuals have needs like eating, and they will resort to whatever they have to in order to meet those needs. And if we are to truly make a dent in the amount of violence and crime that we see in our communities, we have to supplant those opportunities with the legitimate ones that make them positive and productive members in our society.
Okay. So thank you on that. We also mentioned earlier, or had an opportunity to discuss, the disinvestment crime as it relates to even the teens and the opportunities for the teens to obtain employment or keep them busy during the summer to kind of keep them out of trouble. What are the opportunities that you know of that are available to the teenagers who are watching, or maybe their parents, where we can get the kids engaged, possibly in a job or some other program to get them off the street for the summer?
No, absolutely. The City of Chicago, as well as a number of our sister agencies, have employed a vast number of programs to employ youth, whether they are, freshmen and sophomores all the way up to the age of 24. Or One Summer Chicago, After School Matters, all of these programs have employed thousands of individuals. And I'm committed and continue to work to try and make these kind of programs year-round. Recently, we have a new initiative that the mayor has put forward to invest $45 million in some of the most dangerous police districts in our city to try and give people, especially our youth, a different option, along with some of the support and wraparound services to help them be successful. And we look forward to seeing what those results are as they progress.
Okay. We have another caller. Hello, caller.
Yes, I know that you guys were just talking about disinvestment. Alderman, I want to get your take on how the state is involved in this. I believe that a lot of this has to do with families and how there's just not a lot of support for families, mental health, services, social services, even the schools. I mean, right now CPS is struggling and they're wondering where they're going to get funding, for the next year and years on the line. And it really stems also from what's happening downstate. So are you as frustrated as I am and as a lot of people are, and what can be done, or at least what can you do, and maybe what can the city do?
Well, first, thank you for the call. First and foremost, I'm absolutely disgusted with what's going on in Springfield.
So am I. I think a lot of us are.
There's no polite way to say
Yeah.
other than I've had it up to here with what's going on in Springfield, or I should say what's not going on in Springfield. They have a moral obligation as state leaders, both the House, the Senate, and the governor, to do what's right for all citizens in Illinois, not just Chicago, but in Illinois. And they are failing on that front. And yes, the lack of investment in social services that are particularly beneficial to our families and maintaining and supporting struggling family units, not having the funds to do that, absolutely has an impact on our communities. When it comes to the city, we have made every attempt to try and shoulder the burden in the absence of the state's leadership and role in our lives. But we can't continue to do that. It is physically and fiscally impossible for the city to pick up the slack where the state has failed. That doesn't mean we will let them have a pass. That doesn't mean we will not voice our outrage at every chance we get to try and raise the alarms. But I think until we get a different mindset in Springfield and realization that their moral authority is waning by the day, that for every day that they choose not to pass a budget that helps families, helps Illinois, and helps every one of the 102 counties that make up this great state, we're not going to see anything better. Chicago taxpayers, as much as we try, we cannot afford to do the state's job, especially when they continue to take your state sales tax, take your state income tax, and do absolutely nothing by means of returning that investment back into our communities.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There are a couple of questions I wanted to ask. That's a great segue from the caller's question as it relates to the closing of schools in your neighborhood. But before we actually go there and get super serious, because education is an important topic, as well as violence and everything else, I didn't get a chance to actually give you an opportunity to relate to the viewers about your background. So you are a native Chicagoan, right?
I'm born and bred on the city's southwest side. I've been involved politically since I was 18 years old. I was employed by Southwest Airlines for the better part of 12 years. Great airline. It taught me a lot of what I needed to.
It's a great company to work for, actually.
I would give it a shameless plug, voted the #1 airline in the United States again.
Right, okay. And they're in Chicago, so
And-
that's a good
and
thing.
They're in Chicago, but
Chicago's
more
all-
importantly, they also taught me the pillars of good customer service. When people say, how could you go from being in the airline to an alderman? I always tell people, if you've ever been to an airport, you know that sometimes things are not always in your control, but you still have to take ownership and try to help people.
Right.
And that's the same kind of approach that I take as alderman.
Got it. That's funny. One of my first jobs was with Nordstrom in their shoe department, and if anybody's ever worked at Nordstrom, they know that their customer service is unmatched, and I do believe that it assisted in my principles as well. So I definitely understand that. So considering you work for an airline and you understand the culture of airlines and the airport industry in general, what was your reaction to the United fiasco recently where they removed the gentleman from the
the aircraft,
plane because he refused to give up his seat.
Well, the the flying public needs to know that it is well within the airline's right to ask someone in an overbooked situation.
And that was at O'Hare. I forgot about that.
It was in O'Hare.
Right.
To come off an aircraft if we have situations. And I think in this case they had a crew change situation where they were trying to get what's called deadheaders, where a crew has to be transported to a different city so that they can go to work.
Okay.
I think the situation there, while unfortunate, could have easily been resolved if Dr. Dow had simply followed and complied with the orders that were given to him by the captain and then eventually by the aviation police.
Okay.
We had 3 other individuals who were given the same orders to disembark, all promptly complied.
Okay.
They were all compensated very well.
Okay.
But Dr. Dow not only refused, he even told the aviation security officers, you will have to drag me off this plane.
Oh, wow.
So, like in any situation where you have someone in authority giving you a directive, you are not always able to choose to say no. And
Okay.
especially in an airport, which is one of the most highly secured spots in our city, you have to remember that.
Got it. So it was a bad day for him. I'm sure that'll play itself out in court. But we do have another caller.
Awesome.
Hi, caller.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is this, and perhaps the alderman can just help me understand because I honestly am a little confused.
I'll try my best.
That, thank you. I understand that the Chicago Public Schools are in a fiscal crisis, but then I'm also understanding that they are in the midst of building new high schools when we've torn down or we've vacated a number of old schools because there weren't enough people there, so we closed schools. And I guess I'm just trying to understand if we are trying to save money and do some things to sort of have some funds left to actually educate students, what is the wisdom behind building more high schools?
Well,
Okay. Perfect. We were just talking about that.
We were just going to talk about that. So you are correct. A few years back, 52 schools were closed throughout CPS. And in the news recently, we've heard about the building of a Southside High School, a new Southside High School, as well as the possibility of closing 4 of the high schools in Englewood in order to build a singular brand new high school to replace them all. The money that we're using to do that CPS is using, is borrowed money. So you'll be paying like a mortgage on the buildings, and could not be used for instruction or anything else. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that note. But I think the better question is, where's the wisdom in this? Because it's not just about building schools, it's about what you're doing to neighborhoods. And to give you a better idea of the impact of closing schools in order to build one school, you would be taking 4 public high schools out of the picture in an area that goes from 55th Street to 71st Street Western to the Dan Ryan, and you would force all the students in that area to go to one singular high school. And when we saw during the last round of school closures, when they were closed to consolidate because of population, a number of our students didn't make it to their new schools. Their families didn't want them to cross gang lines. They got lost in the transition, and we never saw them again. And I think that doing that at a high school level where you're forcing students to go miles out of their way just to be in a neighborhood school is going to have a disastrous effect on the students and sends a very chilling effect on the community when you're ready to pull up stakes and take away 4 of their largest institutions in the area.
Okay, we continue to have these issues with schools, just in general here in the city. Do you expect for our school, the education politics here in Chicago, which I believe is unrivaled to most big cities, do you think it's expected to possibly get better?
Well, I think it would only intensify as the state continues to abdicate its responsibilities. I hate to go bashing the state again, but I will. Because they are always late with their payments, because they have a formula that puts our children at a disadvantage, by paying us in a block grant as opposed to a per student ratio as the rest of the state gets, we are always going to be fighting for scraps in this city. And we're going to see that continue even as we get an elected school board in the coming years. But I think one of the issues that we need to look at, aside from the fair funding formula, is that the school board, whether it's appointed or elected, will have to make the case that it needs the authority to raise the caps on the property taxes that it is allowed to collect, because right now, even with the max, it's still not able to function properly with its budgetary restraints.
And of course, the only people who are suffering are those who are most vulnerable as
Correct.
it relates to income disparities.
Correct.
And those are the kids.
The only thing that ever breaks the cycle of poverty and violence is education and opportunity, and right now we are willingly allowing that to continue by refusing to negotiate and talk about how to improve budgets and formulas.
Okay. We have another caller. Hi, caller.
Yes, good evening. Great show as always. I want to know, Alderman Lopez, I'm Hispanic. Why there's $150 million worth of construction going on downtown. There's 50 to 70 cranes, but there's two things missing. And the two things are there are no African American construction company or Hispanic construction companies working on the site downtown. Now, the Hispanic and the African American people have put you guys in office, so you're 50% or better. And still, we can't get jobs. I want to know why.
Thank you, caller.
Well, I think we have to make a couple of notes before we discuss that. Is one of the hard parts about being able to include African American and Latino businesses in many of the projects, particularly publicly funded projects where we're able to set the minimum and maximum for participation, is that oftentimes many businesses in our communities are not certified as WMBE in order to participate in the programs or the set-asides for various construction projects. I will tell you, in my ward, I have at least 24 construction and or landscaping type businesses, of which only 2 are certified as WMBE, which means only those 2 are able to participate in any of the publicly funded projects that we have going on. So we need to do a better job as a community, as business owners, in getting certified. And oftentimes I hear from the owners that they don't feel it's worth their effort to do so, which is unacceptable because there are millions of dollars left on the table when you choose to opt out not getting certified. Second, as far as the cranes go downtown and many of the multi-million-dollar projects that we see throughout the city, on the city council we do often bring up the issue of how developers use minority-owned firms. And I will tell you that it is sometimes difficult to try and mandate developers to do a particular thing, such as hire Latino or African American businesses, when they are not actually getting public dollars. If they are doing it on a 100% private basis, then it is up to them to be responsible corporate citizens and do the right thing. You can't necessarily mandate it or withhold their zoning if they choose not to.
Yeah, that's a difficult and age-old question, I think, especially in this city as it relates to minority contractors. So thank you, caller, for your question. We're about to wrap up, but before I provide the wrap-up, is it anything, last words that you would like to provide to the viewers?
You know, first off, it's always a pleasure to be here, and I think that I just want to say, as we head into the summer, I know a lot of us are excited to hit the beaches and excited to do things with our families. We can all enjoy this summer as a city together, but we need to look out for each other. In many communities, my communities, and throughout every community in Chicago, we need to be vigilant and be prepared to step forward when individuals try to break that happiness. And I just encourage all of you to do the right thing this summer, stay safe, and help keep your community safe as well.
All right, and thank you again, Alderman Raymond Lopez of the 15th Ward. This has been Political Forum. I am your host, a board member of CAN TV, Dartesia Pitts. Thank you for tuning in, and join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. for our next show. Have a great evening.
Take care.